This episode contains themes and depictions of cyberbullying, rape, emotional abuse, suicide, and murder, which may be distressing to some viewers. Sensitive content includes graphic languages, discussion of harmful behavior, sexual assault, and emotional trauma. Viewer discretion is advised. Okay, you're sensitive and charming. Now invite her back to your place and let us go home. Two waiters stood side by side, their tired gazes fixed on the couple at the only occupied table in the nearly empty restaurant. What do you bet he stiffs us harder than he stiffs her? The other waiter jokes. In the restaurant, a young couple sat at a table by the window, wrapped in their own little world. The woman leaned forward, resting her chin on her hand, gazing at her partner with stars in her eyes. Her date looked around, catching the waiter's attention with a subtle gesture, as if signaling for their next step in their evening. "Ready for the check?" the waiter asks eagerly. The man responds, "Actually, we were thinking about dessert. Something exciting. Flambé, maybe?" The waiter tries his best to hide his irritated expression. "Folks, the only thing here that's flaming is the maitre d', and he left an hour ago. Time to call it a night," as he starts to gather the leftover dishes on the table. Suddenly, a blinding, fiery glow speeds towards the restaurant window, growing larger and more alarming by the second. The waiter freezes for a split second, then bolts away from the couple's table, vanishing from sight. "Oh my God!" the woman shrieks, whipping around to see what sent the waiter fleeing. Charging towards the restaurant, a figure, a man, engulfed in flames, blazing like a human torch. The couple clutches each other, scrambling back as he collides with the glass, shattering it with a deafening crash and tumbling inside, landing on the vacant table in a fiery heap. Chapter 1. You step into the wrecked restaurant, the smoky air clinging to your clothes as you scan the scene. The flickering police lights outside cast a blue and red hue across the tiled floor, but your focus sharpens as you approach the blanket-covered body sprawled near the overturned tables. "What's on the menu tonight?" you ask the medical examiner, nodding towards the corpse. "Barbecue. A little too well done," she replies, lifting the blanket to reveal the lower half of the charred remains. "And he's missing a few things more valuable than his wallet." You lean in, suppressing a wince at the gruesome sight. "Ouch. Family jewels. Did they get burned off?" "Nope," she says flatly. "If that were the case, we'd see charred bits. This was a chop job." The reality sinks in as you exchange a look with her. Whoever did this wanted to make a point. Later, you follow a dark, sticky trail of blood that snakes out of the restaurant and down a few blocks. This leads you to a shadowed alley where the faint scent of gasoline hits your nose. You crouch, running a gloved hand over a stain on the ground, traces of accelerant. The pieces fall into place. John Doe was mutilated before he was set ablaze. Whoever the killer is, they didn't just want him dead, they wanted him to suffer. As you rise to your feet, the weight of the case already settling on your shoulders, you know one thing. This wasn't random. Chapter 2. You stand in the autopsy suite, the sterile smell of disinfectant sharp in your nose. On the metal table before you lies the unrecognizable body of John Doe, his face obliterated, his flesh charred a deep red. Melinda, the medical examiner, greets you with a grim nod as she pulls on a pair of gloves. "More than a dozen deep puncture wounds," she begins, gesturing towards the disfigured torso, "likely made by the scalpel you recovered. They're scattered across his groin, abdomen, and thighs." You step closer, examining the marks. A sloppy attack, driven by emotion. "Exactly," Melinda agrees, moving to the head of the table. Though if it's any consolation, you're probably feeling more than he did. His talk screens showed high levels of alcohol and crack. You furrow your brow, glancing at the burns. How'd you get all that detail from skin that's this damaged? Melinda picks up a syringe, holding it for you to see. Same way I'll get a fingerprint. She injects a solution into the deflated thumb, the charred finger slowly pumping up as the liquid spreads. Once it's reinflated, she presses it to the scanner. Now we just hope he's in the system, she murmurs, watching the scanner process. The beep feels deafening in the silent room as a profile flashes onto the screen. Joshua Michael Golly, age 22, she reads aloud. Arrests for loitering, turnstile jumping, and public urination. My guess, Melinda continues, peeling off her gloves. This guy was homeless. Chapter 3. You sit across from Tom Gowley in his modest living room. The walls are lined with framed photos of a smiling young man, Josh, posing with his friends, family, and even a scruffy dog in one. My boy was not homeless, Tom says firmly, his mellow voice breaking slightly as he gestures to the pictures. He was the sweetest kid you'd ever meet, friendly with everyone on the block, even after he got sick. You lean forward. Sick with what? Schizophrenia, Tom replies, his eyes clouding. He was diagnosed in 12th grade. After the diagnosis, everything unraveled. Tom's wife left within a year, unable or unwilling to handle the strain. That left Tom to shoulder the burden alone, taking Josh to every appointment, trying every medication the doctors recommended. But nothing worked, and when the frustration and the confusion grew too much, Josh turned to drugs. Then came the disappearances, weeks at a time. No calls, no clues as to where he'd gone. You lower your voice, careful not to push too hard. Mr. Golly, was Josh in trouble with anyone? The attack, it was personal. Tom hesitates, his gaze drifting to one of the photos. I don't know, he finally admits. He hadn't been home for a couple of months. As you leave the house, you're left with more questions than answers. Josh Golly, your burned victim, was indeed homeless, struggling with schizophrenia and substance abuse. But from everything Tom had described, it didn't sound like he was the type of person to make enemies. So who hated him enough to do this? Chapter 4. Back at the crime lab, you stand with the crime scene inspector as he walks you through some unsettling findings. Arsonists usually go for gasoline or lighter fluid, the inspector begins, motioning towards the charred evidence on the table. But in Josh Golly's case, the killer used formaldehyde. You furrow your brow. Formaldehyde? As in the stuff used to preserve specimens? He nods. Exactly. It's an unusual choice, but it tells us something. Whoever did this might have access to a place where formaldehyde is stored, like a lab or medical facility. He gestures to a diagram of the crime scene displayed on the monitor. Based off the scorch marks and puddling, it looks like the perp didn't handle it well. They poured too much, and the flames probably surged out of control. There's even a chance the perp burned themselves during the process. The inspector shifts to another piece of evidence in a clear bag, a sleek metallic object. He holds it up so you can see the engraving on its barrel. Property of BHHS. An electric match, he explains. This one's engraved. Blessed Hearts High School. You let that sink in for a moment. A high school. Formaldehyde likely stolen from a lab, and now a direct tie to a specific institution. The pieces are slowly starting to come together, but the picture they're forming is unlike anything you expected. Chapter 5. You walk through the polished halls of Blessed Heart High School, led by Max, a cheerful student guide. passing rows of students in crisp uniforms, plaid skirts, and white shirts adorned with small crosses. You're reminded you're in a Catholic school. Does everyone have access to the science labs? You ask, glancing around. Sure, during class, Max replies. Otherwise, only the chemistry teacher and Alec Bernardi, a senior. He's in charge of cleaning up the labs and keeping track of the equipment. It's part of an extra credit deal, kind of like what I do as a student escort. Is Alec a trustworthy kid? You ask, watching Max's reaction carefully. He hesitates before responding. I guess so. He's an honor student, but he's not really involved in school clubs, like mine. He points to a banner hanging across the cafeteria. Chastity Circle. Chastity Circle, you read aloud, eyebrows raised. Max grins proudly. Yeah, my girlfriend and I are members. We've committed to abstinence. Oh, there's Alec now. He gestures towards a dark-haired boy sitting alone in a cafeteria table, engrossed in a book. You spot Alec as he briefly glances up, his gaze meeting yours for a split second, before darting back down. His movements seem tense. His grip on the book tightens. Thanks, Max, you say before heading towards Alec. The moment he notices you coming, he hurriedly gathers his things and makes a beeline for the door. Alec, slow down, you call out, your tone firm but calm. I didn't hear any bells ring. You're moving like someone lit a fire under you. Alec stops, reluctantly turning to face you. He clutches his backpack strap tightly with his right hand. Fire? He says, his voice is firm. I don't know anything about a fire. You arch a brow, letting your eyes settle on his hand. The skin is red, blistering, and raw. You nod towards it. Really? Then how'd you burn your hand? Chapter 6. You sit across Alec in the interrogation room. The air is thick with tension. He's a big guy. His size and attitude fill the small space. Anger radiates from him. I'm proud of what I did, he declares, leaning back in his chair with a smirk that doesn't match the gravity of his confession. You lean forward, narrowing your gaze. You murdered a mentally ill man. Well, Josh had it coming, Alec fires back, his tone cold. You piece together the story from his words. Alec knew Josh long before that night in the meatpacking district. This wasn't some random attack. It was personal and deliberate. He used to live in my neighborhood, Alec explains, his voice rising as he gets up to pace the room. But I didn't mean to kill him. I wasn't out there hunting for Josh. I saw him hanging around a couple of times, and yeah, I took the stuff from school to scare him, not to kill him. Then he punched me, grabbed for the scalpel, and I just started stabbing him. It got out of control. He stops pacing and looks directly at you, his chest heaving. I only did what my dad would have done. He'd be proud of me, especially if he knew what Josh did. Your brows furrows as you press further. Oh yeah? And what did he do? Alex's face hardens, his expression turning icy. He raped my sister and got her pregnant. You're momentarily stunned by what he just told you, but you don't let it show. Outside the interrogation room, through one-way glass, Mrs. Bernardi stands frozen. Her hand flies to her mouth, her eyes widening in shock, and her jaw drops as the weight of her son's words sinks in. Chapter 7. You can see exactly where Alec got his fierceness and aggressive nature from. Mrs. Bernardi's sharp New York accent and piercing blue eyes make every word and glance of hers hit hard, like she's sizing you up with each move. It's not intimidating, just striking, like a woman who's seen it all and doesn't waste time with pleasantries. She's clearly wrestling with frustration, anger, and anxiety as Tina Bernardi, her 16-year-old daughter, answers your questions. No one raped me, she insists, her voice steady as she looks straight at you. Tina, I know this can be hard to admit, you say, keeping your tone gentle. You might want to forget it ever happened. Maybe even blame yourself. But Tina holds her ground. I didn't do anything wrong, and neither did Josh. Tina, you need to see a doctor and be tested for STDs, you urge. There are diseases that could harm your baby. You don't understand. Josh didn't rape me. We had sex. It was consensual, Tina exclaims, her frustration clear. You lean in slightly. Then why does your brother think Josh raped you? Tina sighs, her voice softening. I think it was a misunderstanding. I was on the phone with my friend and I made a joke about Josh doing me. Alec overheard. You keep your voice calm. Tina, can you tell me what happened between you and Josh? Tina's tone drops, small but firm. There's no regret in her words. About 3 months ago, I saw Josh coming out of his dad's place upstairs. I knew he'd been sick, but he looked better. Good, even. He said I looked good too. We went up to the roof and talked for a bit. He had a bottle from his dad's liquor cabinet. And things just happened, I guess. Without a condom? You ask. Tina hesitates. He offered to go get one, but I told him not to, she admits softly. Mrs. Bernardi's expression hardens, her disbelief practically audible. What did you say? You clarify. You wanted to get pregnant? Tina meets your gaze, her voice unwavering. Yeah, we all did. Chapter 8. At Blessed Heart High School, 4 teenage girls made a pact to get pregnant and raise their babies together. Leading the pact is Fidelia Vidal, the first to get pregnant. None of the girls grasp the gravity of their situation. They're excitedly talking about baby clothes, daydreaming about sharing the journey of motherhood like it's a group project. The real consequences of pregnancy, however, haven't hit them. When Tina is asked if she's concerned about her baby inheriting a predisposition to schizophrenia, she just shrugs, admitting she doesn't even know what predisposed even means. To her, it's simple. It's just a baby. Fidelia Vidal, the leader of the pact, is a bit of a brat. Yeah, it was my idea. Pretty awesome, huh? We're totally gonna be the hottest MILFs on the block. You raise an eyebrow, your mouth slightly open in disbelief. You take a deep breath, bracing yourself for what's coming next. But before you can respond, Fidelia smirks and presses on. So, what's your story? Excuse me? You got kids? You're kinda old, Fidelia says, sizing you up. We're here to talk about you say, trying to steer the conversation back. But Fidelia doesn't let up. I bet you're jealous. Old people are totally jealous of me. Is that it? Did you wait too long? Tick-tock. You don't back down. Fidelia, a baby is not an accessory. It's not a bracelet, a pair of earrings, or a hot outfit. This is a living, breathing human being you're bringing into the world. You should be terrified of your future. Do you know the odds of a teen parent finishing high school? Forget college or any other dreams you might have had. Life as you know it is over. Fidelia's face falls, and she turns to her father, looking for support. Dad, make it stop. Mr. Vidal steps forward, defensive. Don't try to blame my child, he warns you. She's just a kid. You hold his gaze. That's my point, exactly. Just as you're about to leave the Vidal residence, a young teenage student bursts through the door, his red, puffy eyes revealing he'd been crying for a while. His gaze locks onto Fidelia, and he pulls her into a tight embrace. You recognize him as the student escort from Blessed Heart High School. His voice trembles as he cries into Fidelia's hair. Is it true? Max, I was going to tell you, Fidelia says softly, her tone heavy with sorrow, confirming his worst fear. Max's voice shakes as he clings to Fidelia. We made a commitment to each other, to God. You were supposed to be my first and true wife, and I was supposed to be your first and true husband. It's okay. I still love you. It's okay. Chapter 9. Back in the squad room, you pace in front of the crime board, sorting through the details of the pregnancy pact with ADA Kim Graylick. You come to the conclusion that, since all of the encounters among the minors were consensual, there doesn't appear to be a chargeable crime. But Kim cuts in, pointing out that all the baby daddies had sex with girls under the age of consent, making it statutory rape. Technically, Tina's boyfriend, Josh Golly, would have been charged, but he's dead, she adds. 2 of the other girls were with boys from their own school, both minors. Kim then directs your attention to the last girl in the pact, the father of Fidelia's baby, a 22-year-old known by his street name, Dizzer. You interrupt. Wait a second. I thought this Max kid was Fidelia's boyfriend. Your expression is puzzled. So did he, she replies, looking less than impressed. Chapter 10. You step into the cramped record store, where upbeat electronic music blares through the speakers, filling the already tight space. Behind a DJ set on the counter stands Dizzer, aka Donald Zuko, a tall guy in oversized baggy clothes and a trucker hat tilted sideways. This Dizzer guy, he's a character and a half. When you ask about Fidelia, Dizzer doesn't even recognize her name, despite her being pregnant with his child. For someone whose motto is apparently wreckin' decks and getting sex, it's clear to you that he's hardly concerned about the consequences of his actions. Presenting the DNA warrant, you order Dizzer to pull up his pants and head down to the medical examiner's office. From there, you head to the Vidal residence to request Fidelia undergo an amniocentesis to confirm the baby's DNA's match with Dizzer. That's fine. We'll take her there right now, Mr. Vidal agrees, Mrs. Vidal nodding her head in agreement beside him. Mr. Vidal invites you in as he heads over to knock on Fidelia's bedroom door. Angel, would you come out here, please? No response. Mr. Vidal knocks again. Sweetie, what's our rule? No locked doors. Still silence. Come out here right now. You're going to the doctor. Nothing. Fidelia, open this door. Frustrated, Mr. Vidal asks you to help force it open. You shove against the door until it bursts open, revealing a sight in the center of the room that sends the Vidals into horrified screams. Fidelia Vidal hangs from the ceiling fan, dead. She had ended her life. Chapter 11. Outside the Vidal residence, a crowd has gathered after hearing the news. The ambulance's alarm rings throughout the neighborhood as medical personnel attend to Fidelia's body. You spot Tina sobbing with a small group of other teenage girls. Max is sitting on the steps of the front door, his head in his hands, crying as well. You approach to comfort the sobbing Mrs. Vidal. Through ragged breaths and endless tears, she tells you that she knows why Fidelia did it, why her daughter decided to end her life. You furrow your brows. What are you talking about? You ask. Mrs. Vidal explains that all night, Fidelia had been crying because someone was sending her nasty messages. But with her and Mr. Vidal fighting, yelling, and screaming at each other, they had just sent Fidelia to her room with the computer. She hadn't stopped crying all night. You realize that in order to understand what pushed Fidelia to her breaking point, you need to uncover who and what she was communicating with on that computer. Chapter 12. You slam a pile of papers onto Dizzer's DJ setup back in his cramped store. Dizzer yelps in surprise. What the hell, man? The papers are scattered across the counter, filled with awful, obscene messages exchanged between Fidelia and her username, Dizzer Forever. You read the messages aloud, one line at a time. You are a dumb whore. How dumb do you think that baby will be? Everyone hates you, so STFU, LOL. The world doesn't need you, slut. End it. End it now. You continue, and Dizzer, standing in front of you, is motionless. And Fidelia responds, You are so mean. Forget it. Father is knocking. Gotta go. So she signed off with you after her father was knocking on the door. Dizzer looks genuinely confused, claiming he has no idea what messages you're referring to. He insists it couldn't have been him messaging Fidelia last night because that isn't even his username. Reaching into his back pocket, he pulls out his phone and shows you his profile, where the username reads Dizzer Dog DJ. Then he casually mentions that he was out DJing last night and hooking up with some girls, even pointing to the words on his shirt and reading aloud, wrecking decks and getting sex. But by this point, you're no longer focused on Dizzer. Your mind is consumed by one question. Who is trying to set him up? Upon tracking the IP address linked to the account, the messages were found to have been sent from an internet cafe. There was no sign-in sheet upon logging in, and the user had paid in cash. How could they track it down? Well, 2 doors down from the cafe was a nail salon, and in between was an ATM machine. Who else would be caught withdrawing cash from the ATM just minutes before the messages started exchanging, if not Mrs. Bernardi, Tina's mother? Chapter 13. Now, Mrs. Bernardi can't be charged for the murder of Fidelia Vidal because there's no law against cyberbullying. Technically, she didn't tie the rope around Fidelia's neck, even though she was the cause of it. Technology always outpaces the law. However, to make Mrs. Bernardi suffer for her consequences, ADA Kim Graylek charges her for 1 count of promoting a self-exit attempt, 1 count of reckless endangerment, 1 count of criminal impersonation, 1 count of aggravated harassment, and 1 count of endangering the welfare of a child. You sit in the courtroom positioned in the audience section, directly behind Kim. The jury box sits to your right. 12 jurors, their faces unreadable as they listen intently to the proceedings. To your left, the defense table sits Mrs. Bernardi and her attorney, and the judge, a middle-aged man with graying hair and a stern expression, presides from his elevated bench. Mrs. Bernardi, dressed in a dark conservative suit, rises from the defense table. The bailiff announces, "The witness will now take the stand." She walks slowly to the witness box, her heels clicking sharply on the floor. Kim rises from her seat, adjusting her tailored suit, her eyes locked on Mrs. Bernardi as she strides towards the witness stand. Kim stands before Mrs. Bernardi. "Mrs. Bernardi, can you tell the court a little bit about yourself?" She responds, "I'm a loving mother, a good person." But Kim doesn't let up. "So, a good person goes online, attacks an underage kid while pretending to be someone else?" "It was just in good fun," Mrs. Bernardi insists. "Mrs. Bernardi, would you please read to the jury what you wrote impersonating someone else to Miss Vidal?" Mrs. Bernardi hesitates before reading aloud. "OMFG. You are a dumb whore. How dumb do you think that baby will be?" Kim's voice sharpens. "So, that's what a good person writes to a pregnant teenage girl. I was mad about what she did to this family. She told my girl to get pregnant." Kim pushes forward. "Next line, please." Mrs. Bernardi reads, "Everyone hates you, so FTFU, LOL." Kim, growing more aggressive, retorts, "So, a good person laughs out loud after telling a pregnant teenage girl to shut the blank up. She did a lot worse to my family, Mrs. Bernardi snaps back. Kim's gaze hardens. Next line, please. Mrs. Bernardi takes a breath before reading the next message. The world doesn't need you, slut. End it. End it now. Kim pauses, letting the words sink in. And a good person writes, end it now, to a pregnant teenage girl, and never thinks for a second that she might actually do it. It was just a goof. Kim cuts her off. One last thing, Mrs. Bernardi. Please read to the jury what Mrs. Vidal wrote to you in her final email. Mrs. Bernardi reads, Why are you so mean? Forget it. Fob is knocking. Gotta go. Kim presses. Fidelia's father was knocking on the door to check on her. That's what a good person does. A good parent doesn't persecute other people's kids. No, you're wrong. The voice rings out across the room. Tina Bernardi stands, her words full of emotion. The judge bangs his gavel. Miss Bernardi, you need to sit down. But Tina doesn't listen. The judge gestures for security to escort her out. But she's wrong, Tina protests, her voice muffled as the guards drag her from the courtroom. Fob isn't short for father. Fob means F-A-T-H, first and true husband. They say it in a club at school, the Chastity Circle. The words hang in the air, and your mind begins to race, the realization dawning on you. Fidelia's first and true husband was Max. Max had been knocking on Fidelia's door the night she died. But the Vidals were home when Fidelia supposedly answered the front door, so they should have seen Max come in. Chapter 14. You stand in the middle of an empty classroom at Blessed Hearts High School. Max is seated in front of you, his gaze steady as he watches you. There's slight tension in the air, but he doesn't seem nervous. Why don't you begin, your voice calm, firm. Tell me about 2 nights ago. He responds, Fidelia's dad, he's kind of a jerk. I came up the fire escape to visit her so he wouldn't know. He shrugs nonchalantly. We didn't know because you didn't tell us. Not when we asked you about Fidelia. You didn't say a thing. Max's jaw tightens. It was just all too crazy, okay? His voice is lower now. Maybe you were feeling guilty, you press, your eyes narrowing as you watch his reaction. Guilty? Max looks up at you, the defensiveness rising in his voice. About what? You step forward. About what you did to her. Something bad. Max scoffs. No, I didn't do anything bad. She committed suicide. You don't blink. You let the silence hang in the air. Did she? What? Murder is a sin, Max. You know that. For the first time, Max's hands begin to shake. His face starts to redden. What? No, why would I kill her? I loved her, okay? I loved Fidelia. We were together forever. He looks away. She was my first and true wife. You don't let him off the hook. She wasn't exactly so true, was she? Max's face tightens, his jaw clenching hard. I forgave her for that, he mutters. You lean in closer. Really? You forgave her? She gave it up to Dizzer. She took her clothes off for him. Let him touch her, made love to him, a complete stranger. Max's fists ball up at his sides, his chest rising and falling as guilt starts to seep through his tough exterior. I kept emailing her, texting her. She just kept blowing me off, saying she was busy. And when you crawled into her window that night, there she was again, with Dizzer, right? This time online. He was calling her a slut, a whore. Max flinches at the words but doesn't deny them. She was crying. I never saw her cry like that for me. His voice cracks, but he's still trying to hold it in. You cross your arms, leaning in a little closer. None of this would have happened if she kept her promise to you, huh? The anger in Max ignites. His voice rises now, louder and more defensive. The only person she cared about was whether Dizzer or anyone else hated her. The only person she didn't care about was me. And what happened next, you respond. Max stares at the floor, his voice trembling with the weight of what he's about to admit. I tried to hug her, get her to stop crying, but she slapped me. She said I wasn't a man, said I couldn't even do it. He's shaking now, trying to mask his growing panic. You press forward, your voice steady, and that's when you put your hands around her neck. Max's eyes flood with tears. His breath quickens, shallow gasps. He's losing it. I just wanted her to stop yelling. Stop saying those things. His voice breaks. I didn't mean to kill her. You take a step closer. But you kept squeezing, didn't you? You kept squeezing until she couldn't fight back anymore. Max's face crumples. Tears spill down his cheeks. I didn't mean to. I just wanted her to stop. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. You stand there in silence, and Max crumples under the weight of his own guilt. You don't say another word. Congratulations on solving the mystery. This episode was based off of Law Order SVU's Season 10, Episode 6, called Babes. Thank you. See you again in the next video.